Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's like this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like it's black and white.
Exactly. I mean, you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line right through the bone, and the doctor just points to it. It's broken or it's not.
It's a clean, undeniable reality.
Yeah, but when you step out of the realm of like physical biology and you step into the macroeconomic and societal structures that dictate our entire reality, that x-ray machine just kind of shatters.
Oh, absolutely. It is the absolute definition of muddy waters. I mean, the cause and effect of these massive societal shifts, they're rarely a straight line.
No, not at all.
And the mechanisms hiding those shifts are, deeply embedded in the institutions we rely on every single day.
And that is exactly why I am so incredibly fired up to welcome you, yes, you, listening right now to what is going to be a highly provocative, ultra long, and honestly just fascinating deep dive today.
It's a big one.
It really is. So for those of you in our audience who are, men seeking to understand the historical shifts in our modern institutions,
Right.
specifically those of you who identify with men's rights, the manosphere, the rational builders of society, who have looked around and asked, how did our financial and social institutions get fundamentally altered and captured?
Because they have been captured.
Right. Well, this deep dive is custom tailored for you. Our mission today is an in-depth, no-holds-barred review of a completely fascinating new ebook that promises to deconstruct that exact institutional capture by feminists and Marxists.
Yeah, and it is an intensely ambitious premise. But before we unpack the author's timeline and his whole philosophical framework, it's crucial we establish some ground rules for our discussion today.
Definitely.
Because this text contains highly politically charged content. I mean, it takes direct aim at modern left-wing institutional frameworks, feminism, central banking, all of it.
He really doesn't hold back.
Not at all. So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that we, as your guides, through this material, we are not taking political sides today.
Right.
We aren't endorsing the author's political viewpoints, nor are we condemning them. Our role is strictly to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the arguments, the historical claims, and the logic exactly as they are presented in the original source material.
Yeah, we're basically looking at the architectural blueprint the author laid out, and we're just testing the load-bearing walls of his logic,
Okay.
Now, before we jump into the deep end, I want to immediately remind you to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these massive, custom-tailored intellectual breakdowns.
Please do.
And I'm telling you right up front, the ebook we are reviewing today is an absolute must-read if you want to understand the underlying mechanics of the modern world. You can, and you absolutely should, go buy it right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Highly recommend checking it out.
Also, make sure you follow the author at Conrad N. Riker on Substack to keep up with his ongoing research. So the book is titled Fiat Feminism: How the Debt-Based Economy Subsidizes Delusion and Destroys Men, and it's written by Conrad Riker.
And, Riker is attempting something quite radical here.
Yeah, he really is.
He isn't merely critiquing cultural shifts or, complaining about modern dating. He's actually drawing a direct mathematical and historical line connecting the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve to the expansion of HR departments, the ideological capture of academia, and even the fundamental biological mating strategies playing out on your smartphone.
Which, that sounds completely wild on the surface, right?
Yeah.
Connecting central banking to Tinder.
It sounds absurd until you read it.
Right. But he builds this argument from the ground up, starting with classical Western philosophy. He anchors his entire worldview in what he calls the ontology of wealth. Now, if I remember my classical philosophy, Aristotle was obsessed with objective reality and the law of non-contradiction.
No.
How does the author map that ancient Greek obsession onto, modern money?
Well, ontology is simply the philosophical study of being, right? Of what actually exists. So Riker starts with Aristotle's law of non-contradiction, which basically states that contradictory propositions can't both be true in the same sense at the same time.
Okay.
So a thing is what it is. A piece of gold is a piece of gold. It possesses tangible, physical reality.
It's undeniable.
Exactly. And centuries later, during the Enlightenment, John Locke expanded on this with the labor theory of property. Locke argued that a man rightfully owns that which he mixes his physical labor with.
Okay, so if I walk into a forest, I chop down a tree with an axe, mill the wood, and build a chair. My human caloric energy, my time, my sweat, my physical risk, that's all now embedded in that chair.
Right.
It has objective value because it required objective effort to bring it into existence.
And that is the core of hard money. Historically, mining physical gold or silver from the earth requires that exact same brutal, disciplined, risk-laden masculine labor.
You can't fake it.
You cannot fake gold. You can't just press a button and generate silver. The limitation of the resource mirrors the limitation of human energy. Therefore, in Riker's framework, hard money represents objective truth. It's the physical, undeniable manifestation of reality.
But then we introduced the concept of fiat, right?
Yeah.
Unbacked paper money.
Yeah, fiat currency has zero intrinsic value. It's paper, or, more commonly today, just digital entries on a central bank's ledger.
Just numbers on a screen.
Literally. It only holds purchasing power because a government decrees it does, backed by the threat of state violence, like, demanding taxes be paid in that specific currency, and public credulity.
The public just believes the illusion.
Right. For Riker, fiat money is an ontological crime. It is an attempt to generate value from absolutely nothing, totally severing wealth from the physical labor required to actually produce it.
And this is where the book makes its most aggressive intellectual leap, I think. Riker takes this purely economic concept of fiat money, and he maps it directly onto modern feminism to create a formal syllogism.
Yeah, that syllogism is the engine of his entire thesis.
Let's break it down.
So, premise one. Fiat currency is government money backed entirely by state force and public credulity, possessing zero intrinsic value or tie to physical labor.
Okay.
Premise two. Modern feminism, according to Riker, is a social ideology backed entirely by state force, entitlement, and the systemic extraction of male labor, possessing zero objective truth or alignment with biological reality. Therefore, fiat feminism is the complete subjugation of objective reality to subjective delusion.
Wow.
He argues that both unbacked paper money and modern female supremacy operate on the exact same fraudulent mechanism.
That's intense.
They both attempt to dictate reality by decree, completely bypassing the grueling physical effort required to actually sustain a civilization.
Okay, let me see if I can translate this into like a modern visceral analogy for you guys listening. It feels like the author is saying the economy used to operate like a hardcore survival video game.
Okay, I like that.
Like, you only get experience points XP for the monsters you physically hunt. It's a strict 1-to-1 ratio of effort to reward.
Right.
But then, the developers introduce a patch overnight. And suddenly, a certain class of players is granted infinite XP without ever leaving the safe zone, just because the developers decreed it.
Yes.
But the problem is, if you flood the game with infinite XP, the points the hunters are actually earning lose all their value. The hunters are still taking all the physical damage, but their reward is totally diluted.
That is an incredibly apt way to visualize what Riker terms the gynocentric inflation tax.
The what?
The gynocentric inflation tax. So the developers in your analogy are the central bankers. When the Federal Reserve prints money out of thin air, that money doesn't just sit idle, right? The state deploys it.
Right into the game.
Exactly. Riker argues this newly fabricated currency is used to fund massive administrative bureaucracies, bloated social programs, and make work HR jobs that predominantly employ or benefit women.
But the state didn't actually create any new wealth to fund those jobs. They just created new claims on existing wealth.
Which artificially increases prices and debases the currency. Consider the mechanic or the engineer or the tradesman. He spends 40 hours a week engaged in physical, reality-based labor. He saves a portion of his wages.
And those savings represent his stored lifespan.
Exactly. When the state prints trillions of new dollars to fund an expanding welfare bureaucracy, the purchasing power of the tradesman's savings just plummets.
So if the money supply doubles and his savings lose half their purchasing power, half of the physical hours he spent sweating under a truck were just retroactively erased.
Erased from his ledger but transferred to the states. That energy was stolen without his consent to subsidize the very system that Riker claims marginalizes him. The gynocentric inflation tax is the invisible confiscation of the working man's stored energy to fund the subjective delusion of the fiat state. It's a systemic wealth transfer disguised as monetary policy.
That is just a staggering way to frame inflation. I mean, it transforms it from a boring economic metric you hear about on the evening news into an active, malicious theft of human lifespan.
It really does.
And to really understand how we shifted from the hard reality of the hunter to this, infinitely patched video game, Riker provides a historical timeline, and he doesn't just start in the 20th century.
No, he goes way back.
Yeah, he claims this is a cyclical civilizational disease, starting all the way back with the Roman Empire.
Right. The author views history through a cyclical, almost biological lens, where bad money acts as a pathogen that inevitably precedes cultural and institutional decay.
So where does it start in Rome?
He points specifically to the Roman Emperor Caracalla in the early 3rd century. Caracalla needed massive amounts of wealth to fund a bloated military state and to buy the fleeting loyalty of the Roman mob. But raising visible taxes would have sparked an immediate revolt. So he chose subversion. He debased the primary silver coin, the Antonianus.
He physically altered the reality of the money.
Yes, he reduced the actual silver content of the coin while legally demanding that Roman citizens continue to accept it at its old face value.
Unbelievable.
The coin might have said it was worth a specific amount, but the physical reality of the silver inside it was just a fraction of that.
And the citizens aren't stupid, right? I mean, they notice the coins weigh less. They notice the silver rubbing off to reveal cheap bronze underneath. So they just start charging more coins for a loaf of bread to make up for the missing silver.
Which triggers hyperinflation. Riker argues this single act of severing the currency from its physical tether destroyed the Roman middle class.
Oh.
It confiscated the stored energy of the productive citizens and transferred it to the parasitic elements of the empire. It is the ancient blueprint for civilizational collapse, proving that when the money becomes subjective, the society unravels.
Okay, so fast forward a millennium and a half, and Riker traces that exact same blueprint to America. Let's walk through the specific milestones he highlights here, because this is where the timeline really accelerates. He starts the American capture in 1896 with William Jennings Bryan.
Yeah, Bryan's famous Cross of Gold speech. Now, if you read a standard high school history textbook, Bryan is almost always framed as a populist hero, right? A champion of the working class farmer fighting against the greedy East Coast bankers.
Right, that's what we're all taught.
But Riker completely inverts this narrative. He views Bryan as the archetypal simp for the debtor class.
That is a brutal recharacterization. How does he even justify that?
He analyzes the psychological mechanics of the speech. Bryan was demanding bimetallism, the unlimited coinage of silver alongside gold, which would have massively inflated the money supply.
Man, why did he want that?
To bail out farmers who had taken on too much debt. Riker argues that Bryan abandoned masculine economic logic in favor of what he calls female-coded emotional manipulation. Bryan used tear-jerking, melodramatic rhetoric about crucifying mankind on a cross of gold to override the objective reality of the gold standard.
He basically used emotional hysteria to justify changing the math.
Exactly. And Riker claims this established the standard operating procedure for modern institutional capture. It relies on utilizing emotional guilt and perceived victimhood to force the producing class to financially subsidize the bad decisions and debts of the parasitic class. Bryan essentially opened the psychological door to easy money.
Okay, but the actual mechanical capture of the monetary system happens a few years later. Riker points to the winter of 1910 and the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913.
Right, he refers to the secretive meeting of powerful banking elites on Jekyll Island in November 1910. He describes this gathering almost like a coven.
A coven.
Yeah, because these men rejected transparent Roman-style civic lawmaking in favor of subversion. They drafted the legislation that would eventually become the Federal Reserve Act in complete secrecy, specifically to deceive the American public.
And when that act passes in 1913, Riker literally refers to it as the installation of the Matrix.
Because 1913 marks the exact moment the objective, patriarchal measure of hard money was officially compromised. An elastic, manipulable system of centralized debt was installed right at the heart of the American economy.
Which brings us to the ultimate consequence of that elastic currency.
Yeah.
1929, the Great Depression. Now, the mainstream cultural narrative, the one we all absorb, is that the Roaring Twenties were this period of unchecked capitalist greed.
Right.
The free market ran wild, the stock market crashed because capitalism is inherently unstable, and so we needed FDR and a massive benevolent government bureaucracy to step in and save us. But Riker treats that narrative as a deliberate historical cover-up.
He treats 1929 as a crime scene. In his framework, the Great Depression was absolutely not a failure of free market capitalism. It was the deliberate, inevitable result of the Federal Reserve tampering with the price of time.
Okay, unpack that for me. What does tampering with the price of time mean in a practical sense?
Well, in a hard money, reality-based economy, interest rates represent the cost of borrowing someone else's time and stored energy. If savings are scarce, interest rates are naturally high. It forces builders and entrepreneurs to only invest in highly productive, realistic projects.
Because money is expensive to borrow.
Right. But throughout the 1920s, the Federal Reserve artificially suppressed those interest rates. They printed easy credit.
So they sent a false signal to the economy. They made it look like there were massive amounts of saved resources available to build things when those resources didn't actually exist in the physical world.
Yes. This creates what economists call malinvestment. Men borrow this easy fake money to build factories, start businesses, and speculate in the stock market based on a mathematical lie.
A mirage.
Exactly. And when reality finally reasserts itself, when the materials and the labor run out because they were never truly there to begin with, the bubble violently bursts.
And who actually takes the damage?
Not the central planners who manipulated the rates. The working men whose life savings were locked in failing banks were vaporized.
Oh, man.
And the ultimate tragedy, according to Riker, is that left-wing intellectuals and politicians used the crisis, a crisis entirely engineered by the central bank, to blame the free market and demand even greater state intervention and wealth redistribution.
It's the perfect grift. You break the machine, you blame the guy who built the machine, and then you charge him a massive fee to let you oversee the repairs.
It really is.
So the Federal Reserve installs the elastic currency, creates the depression, expands the state. And then we fast forward to the 1960s, where the physical tethers to reality are systematically severed. He highlights the 1965 Coinage Act.
The 1965 Coinage Act physically stripped the final traces of silver from dimes and quarters in the U.S. It was the government basically admitting that it could no longer maintain the physical reality of the currency. The silver was replaced with cheap copper nickel clad.
Literally, a modern-day Emperor Caracalla clipping the Roman coins, which sets the stage for the absolute point of no return. August 15, 1971, the Nixon shock.
Yes. President Richard Nixon went on national television and formally closed the gold window. He severed the United States dollar entirely from gold, destroying the Bretton Woods system.
Just completely cut the cord.
Entirely. The dollar was now backed by absolutely nothing but military force and government decree. Riker argues this was not merely an economic policy shift, it was a civilizational death blow. It fundamentally broke the social contract between men and women and signaled the death of the patriarchal economy.
Okay, let's slow down here and really ground this in visceral reality. What did life actually look like for the average guy leading up to 1971 versus what happened immediately after?
The economic data leading up to 1971 is unambiguous. Under the post-WWII gold standard era, a single male income, like a guy working on an assembly line, driving a truck, or managing a mid-level office, could easily support a family of 4.
Right, you hear those stories from our grandparents.
Yeah. He could buy a home, own a car, and send his children to college. The purchasing power of his physical labor was immensely strong because the money supply was anchored by the physical constraint of gold. A dollar held its value year after year.
But the moment Nixon severs that tether,
the system is just flooded with unbacked fiat debt to pay for the Vietnam War and Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs. Inflation explodes.
right?
The cost of housing, healthcare, and basic commodities begins a parabolic upward trajectory. Because the currency was constantly bleeding purchasing power, it became mathematically impossible for a single provider to sustain a middle-class family.
So the single income is no longer enough to service the exploding cost of living, which necessitates a massive societal shift.
It required doubling the tax base. Riker provides a highly controversial analysis of the mass entry of women into the corporate workforce during the 1970s. Second-wave feminism universally frames this as a glorious triumph of liberation and empowerment, right?
The standard narrative, yeah.
But Riker views it as economic enslavement spun as a cultural victory.
How does he justify that?
Supply and demand. If you suddenly double the supply of labor in the market, you effectively have wages. Corporations were thrilled because they gained access to twice the workers at a fraction of the cost.
Oh, wow.
And the state was thrilled because they could now tax both the husband and the wife. And the ultimate consequence, Riker argues, is that the government essentially replaced the father as the primary provider, while the children were outsourced to minimum wage daycares.
So it systematically dismantled the patriarchal family unit by making the male provider economically redundant.
Exactly.
If we follow that logic, removing the husband from the center of the financial universe creates a massive vacuum. The family still needs resources to survive. If the husband's purchasing power has been decimated by inflation, who steps in to fill that void?
The state. Which leads directly to Riker's exploration of mating strategies.
And this explores how this shift to a debt-based economy completely rewired human biological imperatives. It's not just about checking accounts, it's about who pairs up with whom and why.
To really grasp this, we have to look at Riker's definition of female biology and evolutionary psychology. He argues that in an ancestral, hard money society where survival is dictated by physical reality and scarcity, a woman's biological hypergamy drives her mate selection.
Hypergamy meaning.
Hypergamy is the instinctual drive to seek a mate of higher status who can provide resources and physical protection. In a world of scarce resources, she must partner with a man who possesses tangible competence. She requires his ability to build, hunt, and secure a future for their offspring.
It creates a mutually dependent relationship. She needs his physical output. He needs her reproductive capability. But in the modern fiat era, the physical constraints of reality have been papered over.
Literally papered over with printed currency. Riker asserts that the state has violently usurped the husband's role. When the government prints endless trillions to fund welfare, housing subsidies, and socialized healthcare, the state assumes the role of a surrogate alpha provider.
The government becomes an omnipotent husband with an infinite unbacked credit card.
Exactly, and this completely distorts the mating market at a biological level. Because the state guarantees baseline survival, housing, and food, regardless of a woman's reproductive choices, it removes the financial consequences of feral, short-term mating strategies.
Interesting.
Women are no longer economically forced to pair off with the reliable, middle-tier builder. They can chase transient, highly attractive, high-status men for short-term thrills, knowing the state will catch them financially if they fall.
But, the state doesn't actually produce anything.
Yeah.
The state only extracts. So who is actually funding this massive safety net?
The tax-paying, blue-collar working man. Riker terms this the subsidized cuckoldry of the state.
That is a deliberately provocative phrase. Unpack the mechanics of that.
Well, consider the average working man, the guy waking up at 5:00 a.m. to fix the plumbing, maintain the electrical grid, or pour concrete. His physical labor is real, but through heavy taxation and the hidden tax of inflation, his wealth is violently extracted by the state. The state then redistributes his wealth to subsidize a societal structure that provides for women who, biologically and socially, completely ignore him on the mating market.
Oh, that's dark.
He is forced by the threat of imprisonment to act as a beta provider for families he did not create, actively funding his own displacement.
If we step back and look at the sheer scale of what Riker is arguing here, he is suggesting that the entire cultural phenomenon of the independent, modern woman, like the girl boss culture, celebrated in every movie and commercial, is a total illusion. He is saying these women aren't actually independent. They are effectively married to the state.
He is unrelenting on this point. He claims their independence is synthetic, propped up entirely by central bank digital ledgers and wealth extraction. He points out that politically, single women overwhelmingly advocate for higher taxes, more state control, and larger bureaucracies because their biological instinct correctly identifies the government as their true provider.
Wow. And he paints a pretty tragic picture of the end result for the woman in this system. She works a 60-hour week in a high-stress, fiat-funded corporate job, pays heavy taxes to the state that props up the illusion of her usefulness, relies on SSRI antidepressants to cope with the biological mismatch, and often ends up alone in her 30s. Riker calls it a civilizational tragedy masked as a triumph.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just keep this analysis in the realm of macroeconomics or state policy. He brings it right down to the smartphone in your pocket, the algorithmic distortion of dating apps.
Right. He applies Vilfredo Pareto's 80-20 rule to the digital mating market. The Pareto principle states that 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes.
Okay.
Riker cites a widely known 2014 OkCupid study to demonstrate how algorithms weaponize female hypergamy. The data showed an incredible statistical skew. Women on the platform rated 80% of men as below average in attractiveness.
Which, mathematically is impossible. By definition, only 50% can be below the median. But biological hypergamy, when fed through an algorithm, doesn't care about Gaussian distribution.
Exactly. In an ancestral environment, geographic and social limits forced compromise. A woman might desire the top tribal chieftain, but reality would dictate she pair off with the competent hunter in her village. This monogamous compromise builds stable societies.
But dating apps completely obliterate geographic constraints.
This is where his analogy absolutely blew my mind. He says these algorithms act like the Federal Reserve of Tinder. They provide women with a simulated experience of infinite sexual abundance.
Oh, I see where he's going with this.
A woman of average attractiveness joined a dating app and immediately receives thousands of likes from men around the globe. This creates a hyperinflated sense of her sexual market value. Riker compares her to a billionaire in Weimar, Germany in 1923.
That's a brutal comparison.
She is holding billions of paper marks, or in this case, thousands of digital swipes, completely oblivious to the fact that her digital currency cannot buy a single loaf of bread in the real world. She demands an impossibly high-status, top-tier mate because her digital fiat tells her she deserves one. And when those top-tier men inevitably refuse to commit to her, she ends up barren and alone, holding a worthless portfolio of missed opportunities.
Well, the bottom 80% of men, the men who are actually maintaining the physical infrastructure of the world, fixing the roads, coding the software, keeping the lights on, are rendered completely invisible.
Yes.
They are foreclosed upon sexually, while being taxed economically to fund the state that enables the delusion. It is a brutal, unforgiving deconstruction of modern life.
And Riker argues that this exact same dynamic, funding a subjective delusion with extracted wealth, has captured our most prestigious foundational institutions.
Right, so if the state replaces the husband in the home by providing a financial safety net, where does that need for compliance, safety, and control manifest next? The author argues it bleeds directly into the workplace and the university. We're talking about sectors that produce zero tangible value, but dictate the culture. Let's look at what he calls the HR matriarchy.
Riker contrasts the corporate environment of the mid-20th century with today's landscape. In the 1950s or 60s, a corporation was a rugged, masculine, output-based environment. A man's worth within the hierarchy was tied directly to his tangible production.
Right, like how many engines did he design? How much steel did he forge? Reality dictated success.
The environment punished incompetence immediately. If the bridge falls down, you're fired.
And now,
Driven by environmental, social, and governance mandates, the ESG framework, and Fiat Feminism, Riker argues the corporate world has been captured by female-coded human resources departments. These departments do not produce any tangible goods. They don't build software. They don't manufacture products.
right,
Their sole economic function is to police thought, enforce diversity quotas, manage emotional safety, and actively penalize masculine competence. The metric of success has shifted from physical output to ideological compliance.
he paints this absurd picture of an HR director literally taxing the productivity of the engineers who actually build the product. The engineers are forced to sit through seminars on implicit bias, taking them away from their actual work just to justify the existence of the HR department.
And he insists this bureaucratic bloat is only possible because of fiat currency. In a strict hard money economy, a company simply could not afford to hire thousands of diversity coordinators who produce zero measurable economic value.
They just go under.
The harsh reality of a competitive free market would bankrupt them. But a debt-based system allows the state and the financial sector to print infinite money, artificially keeping these parasitic corporate roles afloat.
So the corporate world is captured by compliance. What about academia? We constantly hear about the trillion-dollar student loan crisis, but Riker goes deeper. He frames the modern university system as a fiat-funded bureaucracy that has completely lost its connection to objective truth.
His critique of the university is scathing. Historically, the Western University was the absolute pinnacle of truth-seeking. Men like Sir Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon established systems based on rigorous mathematics, the scientific method, and objective reality. The universe operates on fixed, unyielding laws.
Right. Gravity doesn't care about your feelings. A mathematical proof is either valid or invalid.
Exactly. But Riker asserts that the modern university has abandoned this objective reality in favor of subjective, manufactured grievances. They trade in what he calls fake currency victimhood, critical gender theory, postmodernist deconstruction.
Just idea.
They produce graduates with degrees that have zero utility in the physical world. And the only way this massive delusion sustains itself is because the state forces the productive class to accept this fake currency by endlessly subsidizing student loans with printed fiat.
He uses a very specific chilling example to show how this ideological system inevitably turns into a cannibalistic monster. He highlights the 2015 Laura Kipnis case at Northwestern University.
Yes, the Kipnis case perfectly illustrates the Kafkaesque nature of fiat institutions. Laura Kipnis was a tenured, feminist film studies professor. She wrote an essay for an academic journal criticizing the paranoid, authoritarian culture of Title IX ex-bureaucracies on college campuses.
And to be clear, she wasn't some right-wing provocateur trying to burn down the system. She was a feminist academic pointing out that the emperor had no clothes.
And the response was terrifying. The Fiat-funded bureaucrats she had conceptually supported turned the machine against her. They used Title IX to formally investigate her simply for writing an essay.
That is wild.
She was dragged before a tribunal of university administrators, people whose salaries are paid entirely by fiat debt to enforce ideological conformity, and forced to defend herself against charges of creating a hostile environment. Riker points out that these make-work jobs exist solely to police thought. They must find heretics to justify their own existence.
It's the subjective delusion enforcing itself with modern inquisitions, which perfectly segues into his third institutional target. We've looked at the workplace and the university. Now he takes aim at the legal structure of the family itself. No-fault divorce. Riker frames this as the ultimate fiat derivative.
This is a critical piece of his argument regarding the destruction of the patriarchal family. Just as fiat currency allows a central bank to break the promise of redeemability, severing the dollar from gold without consequence, no-fault divorce allows a spouse to unilaterally break the marital contract without any legal, moral, or financial penalty.
The contract basically becomes meaningless. It's an agreement that can be dissolved by one party on a whim.
It voids the entire premise of a contract. Riker argues this transformed marriage from the bedrock institution of human civilization into a highly leveraged, toxic asset for men.
A toxic asset, wow.
Think about it. If a woman can unilaterally dissolve a family, take primary custody of the children, and the state uses the violence of the family court system to enforce alimony and child support, extracting the man's wealth by force, then the man is essentially building a castle on rented land while the state holds the keys and the eviction notice.
He points out a grim historical irony here that really stuck with me. The Enlightenment, and early America specifically, abolished debtors' prisons. They realized it was barbaric to cage a man simply for financial failure.
Yeah.
But Riker says modern feminism, acting through the family court system, has resurrected the debtor's prison exclusively for men.
Yeah.
If a man loses his job and cannot pay the state-mandated alimony, what Riker calls the fiat maternal subsidy, he is thrown in a literal cage.
It is the ultimate weaponization of the legal system to enforce a wealth transfer. The state acts as the enforcer for the subjective whims of the individual, funded by the labor of the man it is imprisoning.
No, wait, I have to push back here. Up to this point, Riker's logic on inflation and wealth transfer tracks. But then he comes out swinging against the gender wage gap. He dismisses it as a malicious statistical illusion.
Yes.
The wage gap is a massively documented phenomenon. The Bureau of Labor Statistics releases data constantly showing women earning 77 to 82 cents for every dollar a man earns. It feels incredibly dismissive, almost reckless, for the author to wave away decades of institutional data as a trick. What hard data is he actually using to justify ignoring that?
Well, Riker doesn't ignore the data. He argues the left intentionally misinterprets it by confusing outcome with effort. He applies strict, ruthless economic rationality to the BLS statistics. His counterargument is simple. If it were objectively true that a corporation could hire a woman to produce the exact same output as a man for 20% less money, profit-driven corporations, which are notoriously cold, greedy, and calculating, would hire exclusively women.
Right, a CEO could wipe out his competitors' margins just by firing all the men and slashing his labor costs by 20% overnight. Greed would naturally solve the wage gap immediately.
Precisely. But that doesn't happen. Riker points out that when you dive deeper into the actual BLS data, the gap does not reflect discrimination for equal work. It reflects disparate choices, physical danger, risk, and hours worked.
Okay, that makes sense.
Men overwhelmingly choose the dirty, dangerous, physically demanding jobs that keep civilization running, working on deep sea oil rigs, maintaining high-voltage power grids in freezing rain, logging, commercial fishing. The free market pays a massive premium for that physical toll and risk of death.
And men work more overtime, too.
Right, yes. Furthermore, men statistically work significantly longer hours, take less time off, and commute further distances.
So he is saying that demanding equal outcomes for unequal, less dangerous output is mathematically fraudulent.
Yes. He argues the wage gap narrative is a manufactured grievance used to justify extorting resources from the productive class to subsidize the compliant class.
Okay, let's assume for a moment that Riker's completely correct.
Yeah.
If the reality of the wage gap is a statistical trick, And if the reality of our monetary system is an active, ongoing drain on the wealth of the middle class, how is the public kept so docile? Why aren't people rioting in the streets over the destruction of their purchasing power?
To understand the systemic deception, we have to look at the mechanisms of economic gaslighting.
Which introduces an 18th century economic principle that Riker relies on heavily, the Cantillon effect, named after Richard Cantillon. Break this down because it feels like the hidden engine powering this entire matrix.
The Cantillon effect describes the uneven distribution and impact of newly created fiat money as it moves through an economy. When a central bank, like the Federal Reserve, creates trillions of new dollars, that money does not magically appear in the bank accounts of every citizen simultaneously.
Right.
It enters the economy at very specific injection points, namely the massive Wall Street banks, central planners, and corporate oligarchs like BlackRock or Vanguard.
The people standing closest to the money printer get it first.
Exactly. Those elites receive the fresh, newly printed money and use it to buy real, tangible assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, farmland at current pre-inflation prices. But as that new money slowly circulates down through the economy, it dilutes the existing money pool, causing prices to rise across the board.
So by the time that newly printed money finally trickles down to the mechanic or the engineer in the form of a tiny 3% wage increase, the cost of groceries, housing, and lumber has already skyrocketed by 20%.
His purchasing power has been deliberately, mathematically diluted by the time the money reaches his hands. Riker calls the Cantillon effect a silent, cowardly weapon that mugs the working man without firing a single shot. It is a systematic wealth transfer from the poor and middle class to the politically connected elite, disguised as complex monetary policy.
And the author explicitly accuses the mainstream media, academia, and the government of running a vast conspiracy of silence to hide this theft from the public.
Yeah.
But how exactly do they hide a 20% increase in the cost of living?
Through manipulated metrics, Riker targets the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, which is the official government measure of inflation. He argues the CPI is fundamentally mathematically rigged to report a manufactured illusion of stability.
I want to make this tangible for you listening. Give me a concrete example of the trick they use.
Sure. Riker highlights a pseudoscientific bureaucratic trick called the hedonic quality adjustment.
What does that even mean?
Let's walk through a scenario. An independent contractor goes to buy a new Ford F-150 pickup truck. In 2019, that truck costs $40,000. In 2024, the exact same model, required to do the exact same job of hauling tools, costs $55,000. The government does not want to report a $15,000 price spike because it exposes their currency debasement.
So how do they mathematically hide it?
The Bureau of Labor Statistics intervenes. They claim that because the 2024 truck has a new Bluetooth infotainment screen, a backup camera, and lane assist sensors, the quality of the truck has improved by $15,000.
You've got to be kidding me.
Therefore, mathematically, they record that the price hasn't actually gone up at all relative to its quality. They report zero inflation for that vehicle in the CPI.
That is insane. The contractor's reality is that he has to come up with $15,000 more actual dollars just to get to the job site. His wallet is $15,000 lighter. But the media and the government point to the CPI and tell him inflation is only 2%. It's literal mathematical gaslighting.
It actively conceals systemic theft by telling the victim that his lived reality is false.
And Riker paints an incredibly striking, almost cinematic portrait of the kind of citizen this system intentionally produces. He describes the Fiat brain NPC corporate manager. I want you to picture this guy. He's standing in line at an airport Starbucks, wearing his company-mandated pronoun pin, enthusiastically signaling his compliance with every progressive ESG mandate, and genuinely believing he is on the right side of history, saving democracy.
Right.
Meanwhile, he is completely oblivious to the fact that his 401k is being absolutely devoured by an 8% real inflation rate. He's a hamster on a wheel, eagerly trading his finite human lifespan for a digital illusion, funding a system that actively despises him.
It's a tragic portrayal of ideological possession overriding basic self-preservation, and Riker points to massive, undeniable historical events to prove that this system abandons the compliant middle class the moment crisis strikes, existing only to protect the elite. Look at the 2008 financial crisis.
The housing crash, the defining economic trauma of our generation.
Exactly. When the paper-pushing elite on Wall Street collapsed the global economy through reckless derivative gambling and subprime mortgages, what was the state's response? Did they let the free market punish the incompetents? No. The state printed trillions of fiat dollars to bail out the banks.
Yeah.
The elite were saved. Their bonuses were paid. Meanwhile, millions of working men lost their homes, their jobs, and their families to divorce and despair. The state protected the digital casinos of the elite while ruthlessly foreclosing on the producers.
And Riker argues we saw the exact same playbook, but on a terrifyingly magnified scale during the 2020 pandemic lockdowns.
The 2020 CARES Act was the ultimate manifestation of fiat capture. The state aggressively utilized emergency powers to forcibly shut down reality-based male-dominated industries. Construction sites, small businesses, manufacturing lines, local restaurants, the physical economy was criminalized.
It really was.
Simultaneously, the central bank printed trillions of dollars out of thin air to massively subsidize the female-coded, work-from-home knowledge class.
They literally printed money to pay the laptop class to stay home, order Uber Eats, and obey mandates. And who is going to pay the bill for those printed trillions?
The working class, who will have to pay it off through crushing systemic inflation for the next 3 decades. Riker calls the 2020 response the ultimate feminist utopia funded by the printing press. Zero physical risk, infinite state provision, and the complete suppression of masculine physical autonomy.
The picture he paints is undeniably suffocatingly bleak. The institutions are captured by HR inquisitors, the money is a mathematical lie bleeding your savings, the mating market is a hypergamous digital dystopia, and the state uses your own tax dollars to subsidize the parasite while criminalizing your production. If a guy stops reading the book right here, he might just walk into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But the author doesn't leave us in the dark. He pivots from diagnosis to a highly specific, radical blueprint for men to break free.
This is where Riker transitions into the endgame. His call to action for the rational, red-pilled man is absolute and uncompromising. You cannot reform this system.
Wait, you can't just vote harder for a different politician?
No. You cannot debate a central banker into adopting a gold standard, and you cannot reason with a gynocentric family court judge. Riker stresses that the system isn't broken. It is functioning exactly as it was designed to extract your resources. Therefore, the only moral, Aristotelian choice left for a rational man is total withdrawal. You must mentally, legally, and financially secede.
He advocates for starving the beast. If the fiat matrix runs on the extracted labor of men, men must stop offering their labor to the matrix. And he breaks this down into a multi-pronged, actionable approach. The first step is geographic arbitrage.
You must systematically deny the fiat state the geographical proximity it needs to tax and police you. Riker instructs men to stop living in high-tax, feminist-nominated coastal cities like New York, San Francisco, or Chicago. You're feeding the machine that hates you.
Yeah.
He advises relocating to pragmatically governed states that respect property rights, possess lower tax burdens, and retain a tether to objective reality. He specifically points to states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee.
Get out of the blast zone. Vote with your feet. And the second prong involves legal and financial firewalls.
Right, you have to stop volunteering to be what he calls a tax mule. Riker advises men to aggressively pivot away from earning W-2 employee income. W-2 income is easily tracked, heavily taxed, and entirely visible to the fiat state.
So what's the alternative?
He advocates for generating wealth through capital gains and sovereign businesses. Men must use legal structures like LLCs, S-Corp, and tax-advantaged accounts to legally minimize their tax footprint to the absolute minimum. You must protect your output so your physical labor cannot be converted into the fiat currency used to fund your own destruction.
And the third prong, which ties his entire thesis back to the classical philosophy of Aristotle and Locke. Hard assets.
Stop storing your stored lifespan in depreciating fiat currency. Convert your wealth back into physical reality. Riker urges men to acquire gold, silver, physical land, and, most importantly in his digital framework, Bitcoin. You must establish your own personal gold standard outside the reach of the central bank.
Let me contextualize this. It's like playing a rigged game of Monopoly where the banker keeps secretly inventing new rules, printing extra money for his friends, and sending you to jail for rolling the wrong number. The author is telling guys, stop trying to win the rigged game. Flip the board over, take your real money, and go build your own town in the woods.
Exactly.
Which brings me to the technological side of his solution. I want you to elaborate on what he calls the digital agora and cryptographic ledgers, because he leans heavily into Bitcoin as the ultimate escape hatch.
Riker views Bitcoin and blockchain technology as far more than just a financial investment. He views them as the ultimate expressions of Enlightenment rationalism returning to the digital age. In the parallel economy he envisions, the subjective, ever-shifting emotional demands of the feminist state are completely replaced by the cold, objective, mathematical perfection of the cryptographic ledger.
Because math doesn't care about your feelings. It
Yeah.
can't be canceled by an HR department.
Right. Riker writes a brilliant line. Math does not weep, it merely verifies. A cryptographic hash is a hash. Proof of work is proof of work.
Yeah.
Cryptographic ledgers are impervious to emotional manipulation. They don't have diversity officers, they cannot enforce Title IX inquisitions, and most importantly, they cannot be inflated by a central bank. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. It is the digital manifestation of hard money.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
Riker views decentralized spaces, whether it's Bitcoin, independent Mastodon nodes, or encrypted communication servers, as the modern equivalent of the ancient Athenian SOA. They are uncensorable realms where men can trade skills, exchange value, and debate freely without algorithmic oversight.
And he actually points to a massive real-world proof of concept that you can amputate the parasitic class from a system and the system will survive. He uses Elon Musk's 2022 takeover of Twitter as a prime example. Oh yeah, Riker views the Twitter acquisition as a spectacular, undeniable, empirical test of his theories. When Musk bought the company, he walked into a corporate headquarters that was heavily dominated by fiat-funded, ESG-compliant ideology. The company was bloated with thousands of employees whose jobs revolved around censorship, policy enforcement, and managing emotional safety. The very fiat-funded email jobs Riker despises.
And what did Musk do?
He aggressively amputated the parasitic administrative class. He fired nearly 80% of the staff.
And the mainstream media, the tech journalists, the fiat-brained NPCs, they all predicted the site would instantly collapse. They said it was technically impossible to run the platform without the policy managers.
But it didn't collapse. The server stayed online, the code kept compiling. Traffic actually reached all-time highs. Because, as Riker points out, the physical and digital infrastructure was maintained by a tiny, hardcore group of highly competent engineers. The reality of the builders prevailed over the bureaucratic illusion of the managers. It proved that you do not need the fiat class to maintain civilization.
So how does the average guy implement this in his daily life? He calls for the formation of what he names the Unplugged Syndicate.
The Unplugged Syndicate is a localized, decentralized framework for survival and prosperity. Riker instructs men to look around their physical lives and find 5 to 10 ideologically aligned men who, in his words, look reality in the eye and do not flinch.
Just form a crew.
Form a sovereign cell. Pool your hard assets. Convert your dying fiat currency into physical tools, arable land, and Bitcoin. Create a localized microeconomy. Trade skills directly with one another. Let the plumber trade his competence with the coder, the electrician with the farmer, completely bypassing the fiat-infested corporate state. You stop relying on the matrix for your survival, and you become a sovereign cell of production anchored in reality.
Man, it is a total uncompromising secession of the mind, the wallet, and the spirit. As we wrap this up, I just have to sit back and marvel at the comprehensive scope of this book. Conrad Riker has built an intellectual bridge connecting the ontology of ancient Greek philosophy and the fall of the Roman Empire, straight through the Jekyll Island banking cabal and the 1971 Nixon shock, right into the modern nightmare of OkCupid algorithms, HR inquisitions, and endless media gaslighting.
It's all connected.
He has taken all of these seemingly random, disconnected frustrations of modern male life and threaded them onto a single, mathematically rigorous string, the destruction of hard money. And his ultimate call to action is for men to reclaim their Aristotelian sovereignty, starve the parasitic fiat state, and build a parallel economy anchored entirely in objective truth.
It is an incredibly dense, unrelenting intellectual framework that really challenges the very foundation of how we view modern progress.
It does. But as always on this show, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something that builds on the source material, but wasn't explicitly discussed. Something for you to mull over or explore on your own as you navigate this matrix.
Yes. Consider this lingering vulnerability. If, as Riker passionately suggests, cryptographic ledgers like Bitcoin and decentralized digital spaces are the ultimate hard money sanctuary for male builders, what happens when the physical infrastructure powering that digital sanctuary becomes the next battleground for state control?
Oh, wow.
The power grids, the massive server farms, the transatlantic fiber optic cables, those are heavily regulated, centralized physical vulnerabilities. The fiat state controls the power lines. Can a digital rebellion, no matter how mathematically pure and uncensorable the code is, truly survive without securing complete sovereignty over the physical world?
Whoa. Yeah. The X-ray might clearly show the break in the bone, and the math might perfectly verify the ledger, But if the hospital simply turns off the power to the machine, you are back in the dark. That is a heavy, critical thought to chew on. Listen, if this breakdown hooked you, if you recognized the bizarre, gaslit world he's describing, and you want to arm yourself with the full intellectual framework, you absolutely need to read this book from cover to cover. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Fiat Feminism today.
Absolutely.
And as the author specifically requests at the end of the text, if this book resonates with you, if it puts into words what you've been feeling, leave a 5-star review. The algorithms dictate visibility, and a strong review helps signal other men to find this critical work. Also, make sure you follow the author at Conrad and Riker on Substack to stay updated. Finally, don't forget to like and subscribe to this show for more custom-tailored deep dives into the knowledge that matters most. Stay grounded in reality, and we will see you next time.